Hello, my name is Pamela, and I'm going to talk to you today about some Jewish festivals. We are in our synagogue, so that's the ark you can see behind me, which I'm going to come to later. So first of all, I want to talk about one of our most important festivals that's mentioned in the Torah, and that's Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Now, the Jewish New Year is not like the secular New Year. We don't have parties, but we do have a special service in the synagogue, and we usually have a meal at home with the family, and then there's a service in the evening as well. So it begins with the family meal, with the service in the synagogue, and then in the morning there's another service in the synagogue. It's also a time when we think about how we have behaved, about how we have been over the last year, whether we've treated people nicely, whether we're going to be a better person next year. And it's a time for saying sorry to God, to ourselves, and to other people. So it's a time of year when we want a sweet New Year. So we eat apples and honey. And we also have cheesecake is a traditional food to eat at that time of year. Again, the honey for sweetness. So we're thinking about a sweet New Year, and we're thinking about how we behave. Now, in the synagogue, one of the special things we do is to blow the ram's horn, which I have here. And this is called a shofar. And we blow the shofar as a wake-up call. We want everybody to wake up to the fact that it's the new year, to wake up to thinking about how they've behaved, how they've been, to think about saying sorry, and to just wake up generally to their behaviour. So this is quite loud. I'm going to attempt to blow it for you, as it is blown in the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. As you can hear, it's quite loud. It's quite difficult to do. It took a lot of practice to learn how to do that. There are various slightly different notes that are played during the service, but that's just a sample of how it works. So that's blown several times during the service at Rosh Hashanah to wake us up, give us an alarm call, if you like. So that's Rosh Hashanah, and just after Rosh Hashanah, 10 days later, is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And during that 10 days, we're expected to think about how we've behaved, to think about how we can make ourselves better people, to say sorry to other people. And on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, we spend the day fasting. So we have a big meal on the night before, usually a big family meal. And then we don't eat for 25 hours, don't eat or drink. And the idea is not as a punishment, but to allow ourselves to spend the whole day in synagogue focusing on our prayers and thinking about how we can make ourselves into better people, make the world a better place. So it's a really special time. If you're elderly or ill, or you're a young person, or you have some condition like diabetes, then you're not expected to fast. Only if you're healthy are you able to fast, and if you feel ill, you're expected to eat. It's not the idea isn't to make yourself ill over it. And it's actually a really cleansing feeling to do that. And it also makes your first meal afterwards a very special meal, because you really taste the food. So that is really a special time of year. There are three more festivals that are mentioned in the Torah, and they are three festivals that are linked, because they are the three times of year when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, that people would take the fruits of their harvest to the temple. So they would take their first fruits. So they would take in September, it would be the first fruits of the fruit harvest. In March time, roughly, it would be the barley harvest. And in May, it would be the wheat harvest. So I'm going to go back and explain a bit more about those. So the first one is Sukkot, which comes a few days after Rosh Hashanah. So we actually have a whole series of festivals all at the same time of year. And Sukkot is a time when the Jews remember coming out of Egypt, when Moses led the people out of Egypt, and they wandered in the desert for 40 years. And because they were wandering, they didn't build permanent homes. They built temporary shelters, and it's a time when we remember those temporary shelters. I have a picture here of a temporary shelter, and I know I used to build one in my garden. The festival lasts for a week or 8 days if you're Orthodox, and you are supposed to live in your Sukkah, it's called, and the festival is called Sukkot, which is the plural of Sukkah. So we build a Sukkah and we're supposed to live in it, but easier in Israel when the weather's nice, but not so easy here because in September the weather's usually horrible and it's raining. So we don't live in it, but I know when I used to build one when I lived in London, we used to go and have tea in the Sukkah because it's one of the commandments is to sit in the Sukkah. So we used to go and do that, and we'd sit and have tea in there. We also wave these special things. These are mentioned in the Torah. Nobody knows exactly why we need to have these, but this is called a Lulav. I'm being very careful with it because it's actually one that I saved from last September, so it's dried up a bit. But it consists of palm leaves, myrtle leaves, and willow, which are all dropping all over the place. So we wave them. I'm just going to wave it gently so you can hear. It sounds like rain. And we wave the lulav, and the other thing that goes with the lulav, because it says in the Torah to take 4 species, and it names the 4 species, except for this one, which is in the Torah is called a goodly fruit, but it has been used. What we use is something called an Etrog. It looks a bit like a lemon, and this one has actually shriveled and the colour's faded. It's normally bright yellow, but because it's old, it's faded. But it smells absolutely beautiful, and it still smells now. We hold them together and we shake them, and we sing verses from the Psalms during that time. So that's a lulav and an etrog, and that's what we do at Sukkot. Now, the next of the 3 festivals is Passover, Pesach as it's known in Hebrew. And Pesach is the time, again, linked with the Exodus from Egypt. It's the story of how Moses led the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt and into freedom and towards the promised land. So this is a time of year when we have a special meal all together. The family get together, have a meal. As you can see here, everyone's seated around the table, and they have a special plate called a Seder Plate, on which we have foods which are symbolic, and we taste these symbolic foods. They're symbolic mainly of slavery and freedom. I won't go into them all now because we haven't got time, but first one is horseradish, which is bitter, so it makes us think of slavery. And another one is a green vegetable, which makes us think of springtime and new life and the new life of freedom. So those are 2 of the things that are on the plate that we eat. Now also, the Israelites didn't have time to bake their bread when they came out of Egypt. They didn't have time to let it rise. If anybody's baked bread, you know it takes time to let it rise. So we didn't have time to let it rise, so we eat matzah, which is unleavened bread. It looks like this, looks like a cracker. And so that time of year, that's what we eat. And the festival again lasts for a week, 8 days for Orthodox. They add extra day to their festival because in olden days people weren't sure how, when their dates were correct, so they added an extra day. Nowadays we know what the date is and we know how long things are, so we don't, for progressive Jews, we don't add the extra dates. That's why you get different dates. So, and we also read Pesach from these books called Haggadah. There's a children's one here and an adult one there, but they're basically telling the story of the Exodus. The next festival that I want to talk about is Shavuot, which is the 3rd festival in the series, and that's about May time, is the wheat harvest. It comes 7 weeks after Pesach, because it takes 7 weeks to plant your wheat seeds and for the wheat seeds to grow. So those festivals are linked in that way. But it's also the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So God gave Moses the Torah, and especially the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. And I'm going to show you just very quickly, open the ark and show you the Torah scrolls in there, which you can see. Those are our Torah scrolls, first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we read from those, and it's a time when we remember that giving of the Torah. And it's a time to eat dairy foods. The real reason for that is lost in the midst of time. I've heard all sorts of reasons why we eat dairy, but it is traditional to eat dairy, and I'm not going to go into why now. The other festivals I wanted to mention are Hanukkah, which is a much later festival. It's not mentioned in the Torah. It's the story of when the Jews were ruled by the Syrians, and the Syrian king Antiochus wanted the Jews to pray to Greek gods, and the Jews didn't want to. So there was a battle between the tiny Jewish army led by Judah Maccabee and the Syrian army, and the Jews won. When they got back to their temple in Jerusalem, they found that the everlasting light, the lamp that was on all the time, which was lit with oil, was not able to be lit because there wasn't enough oil. They found a tiny bit of oil in a little jug, and the oil was only enough for 1 day. But a miracle happened. It lasted for 8 days. So at Hanukkah, we remember that miracle. We have a special lamp, which is reminiscent of the lamp in the temple. But instead of 7 branches like the temple lamp, it has 9. One is called the servant candle in the middle here. I don't know if you can see it, slightly taller than the others. And the others 8 for each day of Hanukkah. And on each day we light 1 candle. So on the first day we light the servant candle and 1, second night servant candle 2, and so on, till we all 8. So that's an 8-day festival. And we remember that story. We eat donuts and latkes, which are potato pancakes, and they're both fried in oil. So there's the connection with the oil. There's always food with Jewish festivals. And we play this game called dreidel, or in Hebrew, subivon. So we see it spinning. So the dreidel spins, and according to the Hebrew letters, you can see it's got Hebrew letters around it, as to whether you win or lose. The letters stand for the words Nes Gadol Haya Sham, which means a great miracle happened there. So that's the Hanukkah very quickly. And just one more I want to mention, which is, actually there's 2 more. One is Purim, which comes usually February, March time. And again, it's a post-Torah festival. It's not mentioned in the Torah, but it's the story of Esther and how Esther saved the Jews from wicked Haman. And it's a great time. It's a time of rejoicing, of parties. We dress up. It's the only time when Jews are supposed to get drunk. And it's just a real jolly time when we tell the story of Esther, and everybody goes a bit crazy. The other one I wanted to mention, which comes at the end of Sukkot, so you remember Sukkot is 8 days, and at the end of Sukkot we have Simchat Torah. Now each week we read a little bit from the Torah, so we start at the beginning, and we read right the way through, it takes a year, and at the end of the year we have a celebration. That is Simchat Torah. So we celebrate with the scrolls, with dancing and singing, and celebrating a whole year of reading from the Torah. So I've done a whirlwind tour around Jewish festivals. There are 1 or 2 others, the very minor ones, but I've given you most of the major ones, the ones that most Jews celebrate. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you. Bye-bye.